Well, a very good evening to you and welcome to Diplomatic COMMUNIQUE, the program that's focusing on our foreign missions, service, and the work that they do for us abroad. My name is Ricardo Knagosep and I'm the host for this program. Tonight we're focusing on Asia, of course, going to one of the biggest economies in the world, Japan. Of course, they are a global superpower, also in terms of the influence that they have in the global geopolitical world order as well. And we are joined by the ambassador, Morven, Luswenyo, to just discuss our bilateral relations with that country and, of course, the other mission it represents and how we can deepen economic cooperation. A very good evening to you and thank you so much for making time out to join us, Ambassador.
Thank you very much for inviting us to participate in these discussions. I look forward to furthering these discussions. Thank you very much.
Just for as a point of departure, maybe just a brief reflection of when exactly we set up the mission in Japan and perhaps some historical ties between the two countries.
Yes, we opened our mission in Japan in 2010. But before that, Japan has been helping Namibia in a variety of ways. I'm sure we'll come to those questions a little later. But our diplomatic relations were established in March 1990. Japan is one of those countries that really concluded or established diplomatic relations with Namibia in 1990.
In terms of that, of course, we know since the establishment of the relations, the cooperation is looking at basically trade and investment. What are some of the areas within the economic diplomacy space that we are looking at cooperating with Japan?
Yes, we tend to emphasize more on trade and economic development. But for bilateral relations to be strengthened, you need to come up with areas such as tourism, areas such as cultural. All these sectors, education, these are all part of the areas or elements that can concretize relations between two countries. So we cannot just talk about trade and so on without us looking at those other elements that I've just mentioned.
I think perhaps let's start with those elements before we get to the trade, because that one is straightforward.
Yes.
Let's reflect a little bit on the cooperation in those sectors that you mentioned on culture, education, those two put together.
Yes. No, thank you very much. On education, currently at the moment we have quite a number of Namibian students who are studying at universities in Japan. I have met quite a number of them. I visited some of their universities, and these are being sponsored by the Japanese government. In terms of, for example, an emphasis on sport, we participated, the Velvicias, they participated in the 2019 World Cup, Rugby World Cup. And you will recall also that we also participated in the Tokyo Olympics. You remember you were there?
Yes,
I hosted you in Tokyo. So these are part of the elements that really are pushing and enhancing our relations between Namibia and Japan. And this is what we need to really look at, not only looking at one specific area. Thank you.
In terms of that sports diplomacy as well, we know, of course, particularly with the Velvicias, there's been a lot of interest shown from the side of Japan. Japan, of course, also one of those teams that consistently go to the World Cup as well. Are there any cooperation plans in that space?
Yes, there are. For example, the Velvicias, they were supposed to play their last game with Canada. But then there was a typhoon. You know that country is subject to typhoons and all those kind of disasters. So now that part of Japan where our team was supposed to play, they are working on a program to invite the Velvicias
back again to Japan
to go and play, because they want the Velvicias. And also you'll recall there were so many areas or places where our team played. So those areas, they still want to continue cooperating with us in terms of sport. Recently, in the Paris, this recent World,
Recent World Cup in France.
yes, I received so many messages wishing our team best, all the best in the Rugby World Cup. So these colleagues from the Japanese society, they still attach great interest and cooperation to our Vicious. And also, their last game, which they should have played, because of that typhoon that I mentioned, our team participated in the cleaning of the streets because roads were flooded, trees fell. So the Velvicious themselves, the team, they walked around in the streets to go in the clean. So that in itself sends a very strong bilateral message between our two countries.
And of course, it really speaks to shared and common values between people. And I think there have been plenty of stories where the Japanese fans, usually even if they attend a big football match or rugby match, they would usually stay behind and assist in terms of the cleaning as well. How do we continue to sort of foster that sort of relations without necessarily watering down the relationship to just business?
I must encourage our people to undertake visits to Japan. I know there are financial constraints involved in some of these undertakings, but for us to enhance this, we really need to continue visiting these countries. As I am sitting here, I have quite a number of requests from different universities, even high schools, whereby these schools want to cooperate with other high schools in Namibia. Universities from Japan wants to cooperate with universities in Namibia in terms of sport, educational and cultural exchanges. So these are very, very critical and important areas that we are, as an embassy, are working on. I think possibly next week I will be meeting the Vice Chancellor of UNAM just to share some of these thoughts with his office. Thank you.
Ambassador, we'll quickly take a short break. You're still watching Diplomatic Communique. When we come back, we continue with our conversation with Ambassador Luswenyo. Stay with us. Welcome back to Diplomatic Communique, where discussion program. We look at everything that has to do with our foreign service. Tonight we're focusing on Japan, and we are joined by Ambassador Luswenyo. Ambassador, just to look at moving over to the economic side of our cooperation. We know, of course, Japan is a global superpower in as far as their GDP and economy. I think the third largest or fourth, speaking under correction. Yeah. Recently, or in fact, just before COVID, there was a Japan SADC business forum where they were looking at how they can strengthen investment and trade relations between Japan and SADC. How did that go, and perhaps will there be another one post-COVID?
Yes, thank you very much. When I arrived in Tokyo at the beginning of 2019, Namibia was chair of SADC. And when I arrived there, I immediately took over as chair of the SADC group of ambassadors. And they were already working or preparing for that SADC Japan Business Forum. So it was held in Osaka. And I chaired that whole conference as the chair of the SADC. We have an arrangement with the SADC Secretariat in Botswana that we will continue to hold these kind of forums in future. The last 2 or so years were interrupted by COVID, as we all know. But we have that program as SADC ambassadors based in Tokyo to organize. I think we have one planned for early next year. And we are also intending to invite somebody senior from the SADC Secretariat to come and join us. So it is already bearing fruit, especially in the areas of energy. Of course, different countries from the SADC, they have their own priorities and so on. But in our case here, it's already bearing fruit.
So in terms of the focus for us, you're saying it's going to be energy. What kind of cooperation are we looking at?
We are looking at energy. That's energy in the health sector, and of course in the sports, in agriculture. Those are the most important economical sectors that we are working on. That forum that we hosted, we had invited quite a number of Japanese business executives. Who I think it was close to about 200 in Osaka.
That's a very, very, very big number if one looks at that. But if you look at this, I think in terms of particularly with collaborations for small countries such as ours, if we're talking about the GDP relative, how difficult is it really to sit on a table and have equal negotiation and conversation, particularly where financial gains are to be made?
Yeah, it's quite a challenge, but they prefer to listen. And you should know that we are now living in a digital world. They would first do their research. Look at what the country's status is, for example, like in our case. So by the time they come to you and begin to engage you, they would have done their assessment, they have done their research and so on. So it is for us as diplomats to really be more understanding of the environment in our respective countries. But they are willing and prepared to cooperate and to invest in our country.
In terms of investing in our country as well, I think one of the most important things that you had mentioned in the past was also scholarships, those full scholarships that are being offered by the Japanese government. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is, of course, in context of the fact that they are also a technology powerhouse. And we are looking at becoming a knowledge-based and industrialized country in the future. Are these scholarships being taken up by Namibians?
Oh, yes, definitely. As I mentioned to you earlier on, we have almost all the students that are studying in Japan
are on scholarship.
Are on the scholarships. And just 2 days ago, I got an email of one of our students who just arrived in Tokyo, informing me that I have arrived to take up my studies. So really, our people are taking up those. It's just that we are too few.
The numbers could get better, you say?
Yes, the numbers could get better. You know, I have traveled the whole of Japan, and I have spoken at universities. You go there, you find other countries have almost 100, 200 students. And in Namibia, only one sitting there.
Only one sitting. How can we perhaps improve that, Ambassador, in terms of, because now we know that we have got a bit of a challenge with employment on this end for young people. Here are the opportunities now for you to go and upskill in one of the biggest technology hubs in the world.
Yes.
Must you become deliberate about choosing the students, or what do you think could be some of the interventions?
I think efforts have got to be made, because these sponsorships are processed through the Embassy of Japan here and also through JICA.
Yes.
They have websites, and this is where all the information is made available for our students to have access to and apply and seek for these sponsorships. So I am really encouraging our young people. There's one country, for example, in our region, 100 students all studying IT.
So that's what I'm referring to. That's very deliberate. To say, listen, we need to send 100 every year to go study IT. 4 or 5 year cycle, you already know that you're 4 or 500.
Exactly. But they have to meet the requirements. They have to meet the requirements. We have what we call TICAD, which is Tokyo International Conference on African Development. This provides for education, for health, for energy, and so on. So we need to utilize some of these resources that the Japanese government is offering. it's for our ministries, relevant ministries, to really inform the students, potential would-be students, about the availability of these sponsorships. During my time in Tokyo, I have attended about 5 graduation ceremonies by where our own Namibian students
are also graduating.
have received their PhDs.
Oh, beautiful.
And during COVID, because one of the students couldn't make it, I was offered that opportunity and the honor to sit with the professors and receive a PhD for one of our students. I think that student is now at UNAM. So you really feel so proud when you witness what your Namibian students are achieving outside there.
If you just joined us, you're watching Diplomatic Communique. We'll continue with more after the break. Of course, Ambassador Luswenyo is also responsible for South Korea. We'll reflect on the bilateral relations with that country and I think tap in also on his experience as a veteran diplomat on the state of global affairs and diplomacy in general. This is Diplomatic Communique. Stay with us. Welcome back to Diplomatic Communique, the program that focuses on the foreign service of our country. And today we are looking at Japan, of course, and South Korea, represented by our ambassador to those two countries. A bit earlier on, of course, we reflected for quite a bit on Japan. But South Korea is also one of your missions. I know that we are not having the big, I think, trade relations with South Korea, but as a post that you cover, what is the status of our bilateral relations?
Thank you very much. Our bilateral relations with South Korea are cordial, very warm. I had presented my credentials there only in November last year because they had to go through change of government and so on. Currently, we are looking at energy. I think about 2 or so months ago, there was a Korean delegation here to come and meet all the different sectors. There's a place called Jeju Island, and even our Deputy Minister of Mines and Energy, she just returned there, I think 2 days ago.
Yeah.
She had gone to attend a conference. So we are looking at energy, we are looking at agriculture, we are looking at forestry. You know, most of our country is dry, and the way they have done their forestry, it's marvelous. You have seen in Tokyo when you drove around there, you've seen how beautiful these places are. So these are the areas or elements that we are looking at to develop bilateral relations and cooperation with South Korea. I had attended so many meetings and conferences, both in Seoul and also outside Seoul in Korea. But the areas that they are really emphasizing on is agriculture. And that is also one of the sectors that we are looking at. For example, next year, they are going to host an African-Korean summit. And they are likely going to extend invitations to our leadership. So our relations really are very, very active with Korea, but we have also got to take that opportunity also.
If one looks at it now, and Ambassador, I really just wanted to tap also into your experience of having, of course, being one of the senior diplomats within our foreign service. There is the saying that diplomacy prevents war. We use diplomacy. We sit down, we talk, we reach an understanding. But it seems like over the last few years, more and more, and that of course being facilitated by multilateralism through these organizations like AU, etc., etc. But more and more we are seeing that there's a lot of fragmentation, particularly at regional bloc level. And when that fragmentation happens, automatically it puts under risk the larger body there as well. What do you think are some of the factors that could be perhaps contributing to that fragmentation?
You know, countries now have different priorities. We are members of SADC. And in SADC we have so many protocols that govern us as members of SADC. Now, if a country has its own priorities, it becomes difficult for another country to influence the other country. You would find another country cannot tell me not to have cooperation with another country. So these are the elements that are leading to this fragmentation. I cannot be told by another country that, listen, what we want you to do is this. Although we are members of that body, it's really a concern because we are losing sight of that unity within these bodies, in the AU, in the UN, the SADC, and so on. You might find there's this thing coming up of unilateralism, imposing things on other people. That if you don't join us, we'll do it our way.
We'll do it our way, the sanctions coming your way, or whatever
you will receive sanctions. And so these are all the things that are already creating tension, division, and so on amongst most of the countries. There are so many conflicts that are happening all over the world now.
Some commentators are saying that the fact that these conflicts are still taking place is not a good sign for diplomacy generally, globally, and saying that it might be failing in many respects in terms of what the initial intentions were and the ethos behind diplomacy and what it's supposed to achieve.
It's really a concern. It's really a big concern at the moment. You know, we have a position as Namibia, a friend to everybody and an enemy to none. That is we are also members of the non-aligned movement. And our position also is the non-interference into the internal affairs of other countries. But we encourage the peaceful resolution of disputes. Come around the table, sit together, think together, and see how you can solve these pressing issues together. So that is the approach that we are encouraging as Namibia and us as diplomats out there. Because out there we are interacting with different personalities, from the presidents, prime ministers, kings, and so on. And these, when you interact or meet with them, these are the questions they are asking. So as diplomats, we have to be fully prepared to articulate the policies and priorities of our respective countries.
If we look at it, particularly also in that context as well, Namibia has very strong positions on most of the major global events. On Cuba, we are very, very clear on that we don't want the blockade. In Palestine, we are also very, very clear in terms of our position that the two-state solution of 1947 is the only option. But sometimes the government where you're designated might have a completely polar opposite view in terms of that. How do you mitigate that within diplomacy?
Yes, it's not an easy approach that one should take, but all what is important is for us to articulate our positions continuously. Even when they say we don't agree with you, you have to stand by your position. You cannot be influenced by somebody else, contrary to what your country, your government stands for. So we are there really to ensure that we convey and somehow make people understand our position. But not to say, listen, if you don't take my position, then we are not going to discuss any further. So we really encourage negotiations we really encourage interactions and for people to come together and see. I mean, differences in certain issues do not necessarily mean bilateral relations should be interfered with. Bilateral relations continue.
Continue.
Yes.
Differences are differences.
Exactly. Yes.
In conclusion, just to, I think, get a parting shot, we know that there's a lot of young and upcoming diplomats that are getting into the system. We have a relatively young population. So in the next 5, 10, 15 years, the Foreign Service will, of course, also reflect that as well. What is your, perhaps, I think, message to young Namibians, young students, university graduates that are watching right now that would want to represent their country in service of diplomacy?
Yes. I joined the ministry in 1990. I'm one of the very senior staff members of the ministry. I'm quite encouraged to see the young people joining the ministry now. What I would want to emphasize is our universities to introduce those political courses that would prepare our young people to enter the Foreign Service. That is one. The second one is for the Ministry of International Relations itself, as they have been doing, to conduct these lecture series. Not only to go to universities, but they must go to primary schools as well, senior secondary schools as well.
So it's already inculcated from an early age.
Early age, from the very, very early age. In that way, because what I've seen in most countries that I've served in almost 4 or 5 countries. They have what they call academic schools or diplomatic academies, whereby students, they go straight into that academy, diplomatic school, where they are trained, and before they are even sent out at missions. And this is where I am encouraging our young people, really listening to us, seeing us here sitting. It is really an honor for any Namibian to be out there representing your country. And we encourage our young people to follow us, to work hard and join the Foreign Service.
Definitely. Ambassador Luswenyo, thank you so much for making time out to join us on Diplomatic Communique. We will definitely keep in touch and hopefully have you back here soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, of course, veteran diplomat Ambassador Morven Luswenyo, of course, sharing with us in terms of the insights for Japan and South Korea, but also just reflections on the global state of diplomacy, saying that we have to stick to diplomacy if we want to avoid the loss of lives and, of course, the protection of human rights. I'm Ricardo Tlangosef. This has been another edition of Diplomatic Communique. Stay with us. We'll be back with more in the next edition. Bye-bye.